Israel's got a new government, and if you listen to the mainstream media, it's going to be a disaster. But guess what? That's because this new government is conservative. Israel's new conservative government and the perspective from Israel on the world. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Listen to this new headline from Vox.com. Netanyahu's right-wing Israeli government is beyond extreme. Or this one from Al Jazeera. Not exactly a news of solid source, but still, Al Jazeera. It's got its area of influence. Why is the U.S. worried about Israel's new government? Well, I can answer that. Because Israel's new government is conservative. It would be a great government for the United States, from the United States perspective, from the White House's perspective, to put it more truthfully, if Donald Trump were president of the United States. But because Joe Biden is president of the United States, the newly seated government in Israel is problematic, to put it mildly. Yes, this Joe Biden White House, like another White House from an earlier time called the Barack Obama administration, the Barack Obama White House, isn't exactly staunchly on the side of Israel. This White House likes to sort of walk a little diplomatic dance step when it comes to supporting Israel. Likes to go out there and talk about a two-state solution, even though that's ridiculous from the perspective of Israel. Or likes to go out there and talk about a nuclear treaty with Iran, as if Iran is a country you can trust, a regime that is trustworthy. Didn't we already go through that with Barack Obama? Yes, we did. And then came the Donald Trump administration that said, whoa, hold the phone on that. This treaty is ridiculous. It's basically using American dollars to fund nuclear development in Iran, all the while turning a blind eye toward Iran's nuclear development. So we already went down that path with Barack Obama. Big failure. Donald Trump fixed the problem, and now here comes the Joe Biden administration wanting to jumpstart the same problem and pretend as if Iran is a country that you can trust just the same as any other country of the world. The U.S. on Israel's far-right government, Politico wrote, it is what it is. The new Israeli government is dotted with religious zealots. Yes, that is what Politico wrote. Want to know what else Politico wrote? This is interesting too. Tell me if this rings a bell with any politician in America, a description about any politician in America. Politico wrote, the new Israeli leadership, and we're talking about Benjamin Netanyahu here and his conservative consortium. The new Israeli leadership includes backers of what many critics allege are racist, homophobic, and misogynistic policies. Where did we hear that in America? Oh, I know, Donald Trump. Donald Trump and his Make America Great Again and America First agenda and policies. Those were described similarly as racist, homophobic, symptomatic of misogyny. And so wasn't Donald Trump. Donald Trump was labeled the enemy number one of minority communities. Enemy number one because of his racist tendencies, his racist policies, his racist agenda, and so forth. Well, now Benjamin Netanyahu is getting similarly labeled by the same press that labeled Donald Trump that way. And what's really curious is there's not even any quotable quotes here. There are phrases like many critics. The new Israeli leadership, Politico wrote, includes backers of what many critics allege. Really? Many critics? You mean many anti-conservative critics? Many people in politics who do not align themselves with a conservative agenda? Critics? Of course, conservatives have critics. They're called liberals. They're called socialists. They're called Marxist. They're called globalists. But let's call a spade what a spade is, right? Benjamin Netanyahu is conservative. Wow, no surprise there. So also no surprise that he is going to have critics of his agenda, of his vision of leading Israel, that hail from the leftist camp. No surprise. Why does the left-leaning media, the mainstream media, the reputable media, if you listen to the big tech heads, why does the mainstream media always make it seem that conservative critics, that critics of conservative politics are just your average run-of-the-mill generic people, no special political affiliation? They're your scholarly thinking type, your critically thinking type, have no political axe to grind. When really, if you get down to the nitty-gritty, the critics of conservative politicians are those who, guess what, are liberals, far leftists, globalists. That's how the mainstream media gets by with putting forward stories that do not really match up with the headlines unless the writer of these stories actually force the narrative to match up with the headlines. The U.S. on Israel's far-right government, it is what it is. As if, hands in the air, nothing we can do about it. Us Joe Biden administration people have to take the high road, the moral ground, and deal with these far-right nutcases that Benjamin Netanyahu is bringing into office. Washington Post, what to know about Netanyahu's far-right government in Israel. Talk about laying the groundwork for gloom and doom. Look, since Bibi took office, since Bibi won election and took office, there have been nothing but gloom and doom predictions for Israel. Israel, if you listen to most of the mainstream media, is about to fall off the face of the map because Benjamin Netanyahu is going to destroy the country from within. And America, oh America, where are you to come save Israel from these far-right conservative nutcases? From the Los Angeles Times, is Israel's new government destroying democracy? Blinken surveys situation on Middle East trip. Yes, send in the Joe Biden administration, because what a conservative administration like Benjamin Netanyahu needs is unsolicited but much needed advice from a far leftist globalist administration like Joe Biden's. Let me read the first few lines from this LA piece, penned in late January. As Israel in recent weeks put together its most right-wing, religiously conservative government in history, senior U.S. officials insisted on waiting and seeing just how radical things would get. They emphasized policies, not personalities. Now, nearly a month into a government led by returning Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and populated by ultra-Orthodox politicians, it is already clear that a new bar is being set in controversial actions and extreme ideologies. Secretary of State Antony J. Blinken arrives in Israel on Monday to take stock of the situation. But can he be effective given the Israeli government's momentum? Wow, what a dramatic scene unfolding in Israel. Who would have thought the election, or let's be real, the reelection of a conservative political leader would bring such demise to a nation that, by all accounts, by all Christian accounts, was formed by God? Back to LA Times. Many in and outside of Israel fear the democracy that the country long claimed to be often billed the only democracy in the Middle East, is in danger of being badly eroded. Okay, enough of that. We're getting the picture. The same thing they said about Donald Trump and Donald Trump's White House and Donald Trump's administration and Donald Trump's MAGA policies and Donald Trump's America First policies. These same news outlets are saying the exact same thing about Israel right now, about the conservative Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership in Israel, and they are predicting gloom and doom, the same they did under Donald Trump. Well, how about reeling back the hyperbole and speaking with somebody who not only is on the ground in Israel, but as a member of the media, speaks to many of these people in politics in Israel who are being criticized right now for taking actions that will move Israel into a state of irreversible demise. His name is Alex Traiman. He is CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief of Jewish News Syndicate, and he and his family have lived in Jerusalem since 2004. So he brings an interesting professional and personal perspective to a discussion of how Israel is viewing its new leadership and how Israel is viewing what's going on in the world today, not just with America, but with organizations like the World Economic Forum and World Health Organization. Alex Traiman, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. It's great to have you.
Thanks so much, Cheryl.
So you guys posted this interesting piece about your finance minister going forward with settlements in Judea and Samaria over the opposition of the United States government. Could you just sort of lay the groundwork, explain what the significance of that move is?
Yeah, sure. So I think settlements is one of the areas where there's a lot of misconceptions and people don't really understand what they are. By and large, these are suburban communities. Jews have lived in them for many decades. The earliest settlements probably went up in about 1977, about 10 years after the Six-Day War, when Israel first moved in to the biblical communities of Judea and Samaria, which are commonly known in the international community as the West Bank. And so you have within the settlements some of the original settlements that were developed before the Oslo Accords were signed in 1993. And then you have settlements which were called new settlements, which were started after the Oslo Accords were signed. And all of these settlements are located within what's called Area C. And the Oslo Accords are divided Judea and Samaria up into areas A, B, and C. And Area C is under full Israeli administrative and military control. So these are areas that Israel controls. And you have some communities that have sprung up at certain points. Now, some of these communities, which are now going to be legalized by the Israeli government, have been standing for 30 years. They have electricity, they have streets, they have residents, they have synagogues, and yet there is this difficult situation in which many of these communities are considered illegal under international law, and part of that reason is because successive Israeli governments have actually considered these communities to be illegal under Israeli law. So this government, which is a right-wing government and generally supports Jewish life in Judea and Samaria, is undertaking a new policy, which is to legalize the existing settlements piece by piece. And by the way, that's not inconsistent with what Secretary of State, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he laid out what was actually became known in Israel as the Pompeo Doctrine, where he said that settlements in Judea and Samaria are not per se illegal under international law, but that still leaves the question of whether they're illegal under Israeli law. So this government now is taking the uptick in terrorism, which is basically meant to push Israelis out of their rights in Judea and Samaria, and they are flipping the scales by actually legalizing some of these settlements.
And geographically speaking, the significance of these areas is crucial to Israel's national security and defense, yes?
Well, Israel's a very narrow country, and from where, like near Ben Gurion Airport, which is the main international airport, the airport is less than a mile away from the border of Samaria in that area, and Galilee and Samaria and the Mediterranean Sea, you have a width of the country of only 9 miles wide. So absolutely, all of these areas are critical to Israel's national security and its ability to defend itself.
So you've been in Israel long enough to see the transition from the Donald Trump administration here in America to now the Joe Biden administration. What is the tone and tenor of the Israel people regarding the changeover in administration here? Are they favorable to Joe Biden? Are they fearful of the Joe Biden administration?
Yeah, I think it's actually important to go back one president before Donald Trump.
Right.
Go to the administration of Barack Obama, and Israelis were always very suspicious of Barack Obama. They saw what he did when he went to Egypt. His first foreign policy speech was in Egypt, and he later then supported the overthrow of Hosni Mubarak and serious support behind the Muslim Brotherhood, which was led at the time by Mohammed Morsi. They saw how Obama said that Erdogan, the president of Turkey, was probably his best friend in terms of international leaders. And so Israelis were pretty distrustful of Barack Obama. Then Donald Trump came along, and Trump did many things really to bolster Israel's standing in the world and also to bolster security. We know that he moved the embassy of the United States from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is the capital of the state of Israel. He recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and they also, as you mentioned, stated that the settlements were not necessarily illegal under international law. He also significantly defunded the Palestinian Authority. He expelled the PLO mission from Washington, D.C. He also defunded some of the UN groups like UNRWA, for example, that sort of perpetuates a refugee crisis among Palestinians living in the disputed territories. And so while most of the world was very suspect of Donald Trump, and Israelis recognized that much of the world was suspect of Donald Trump, they had every reason to appreciate Donald Trump. And obviously, I forgot to mention the crowning achievement of that, which was the Abraham Accords, which I guarantee you would not have been signed without the forward thinking of the Trump administration. So now we have the Biden administration in place, and if you look around much of the administration, what you see are the same people that were running foreign policy during the Obama administration. Now, at the same time, it is important to note that even Prime Minister Netanyahu says repeatedly that he knows Joe Biden for, I guess, 40 years already and considers Biden to be a friend of the Jewish state. So I think Israelis, by and large, are not as suspect of Biden as they were of Obama. They feel that Biden does have a warm spot in his heart for the state of Israel. But when you look at the policies that this administration is advocating, specifically towards moving back to a negotiated track of a two-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians, and also their support for re-entering into an Iran nuclear deal, the policies of the Biden administration don't look very different than those of the Obama administration.
Yeah, I've seen the headlines about Netanyahu talking about Joe Biden as being a friend and knowing him for 40 years and so forth. But I wonder, when you read through the unstated, if he really believes that, or he is making those public statements for diplomatic reasons because of what you just outlined. This administration here in the United States favors a two-state solution, which seems to me, having spent some time on the ground just recently in Israel and talking to people there, it's ridiculous. That's just a political maneuver.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. There's no doubt that Netanyahu is well versed in American politics. He knows exactly who he's dealing with. He knows all the players. He knows the policies inside and out. I think he recognizes that Biden is actually not calling the shots with regard to foreign policy, specifically that in the Middle East. That you're dealing with Anthony Blinken, you're dealing with Special Envoy to the Palestinians, Hadi Amr, and you're dealing with U.S. Ambassador to the State of Israel, Tom Nides, who Nides was previously in the running to be Chief of Staff had Hillary Clinton become president in 2016. And I do think that you're correct that the statements about the friendship are there to not only to appease Biden, and to not make things worse, but I think that there's also another strategic purpose, which is to express, to the enemies of the Jewish state, particularly in Iran, that Netanyahu and Biden are lockstep. And even if that might not be the case, still expressing that friendship, I think, does signal Jerusalem's closeness to Washington and Netanyahu's closeness to the U.S. administration.
That is a good point, to message that the friendship is still there and strong in order to maybe put Iran on notice somehow. But you must be looking forward with interest and with anticipation to the next administration. We just had Nikki Haley here announce her run for the presidency. There's talk about Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, and so forth. What is Israel looking for in terms of the next U.S. president? Who do they think would be the best?
Well, I think that one of the things that Trump did was actually reset Republican policy towards Israel. If you look back at previous presidents, you could suggest that the policies of the Bush administration and the Bush Senior and even Reagan, they might not have looked so much different than the Clinton administration or Democratic administrations before that. But Trump really did reset that relationship. And Nikki Haley was a staunch defender of Israel at the United Nations, and that's one of the main battlefronts against the state of Israel's legitimacy. And she was there to provide almost an automatic veto against the anti-Israel resolutions that came up. So obviously, Israelis would be very happy. Mike Pompeo, as I mentioned, what's known as the Pompeo Doctrine, relates to what he believed was the view of Israeli settlements and their potential legality. So he would also be an incredible candidate. I think really, like I said, the Trump administration reset the policy for the entire Republican Party, and I would imagine if a Republican takes the White House in 2024, that the policies would shift back closer to what we saw during the Trump administration.
Yeah, I honestly think anybody but a Democrat would be great in the White House, though there are whispers now about a Michelle Obama run, which I think would be a disaster. And I'm sure Israel would be a little bit on edge if such a scenario were to be realized.
Yeah, Michelle, I want to say just one thing, is that when it comes to the relationship between the United States and Israel, the United States gains so much from Israel in terms of real-time intelligence, in terms of purchasing weapons from U.S. manufacturers, in terms of testing those weapons and making sure that they're battle-ready, and giving all of that feedback. And I think it's very difficult for any U.S. president, whether that's Michelle Obama or anybody else, even if they have anti-Israel sentiment within their heart, to cut off that relationship. So I do think that Israel does have much more leverage in the relationship than most Americans realize.
You mentioned a couple minutes ago about Donald Trump resetting the Republican Party, and I agree wholeheartedly with your assessment there. But that reminds me of what I wanted to chat about with you as well, the Great Reset, globalism, and Israel's part in resisting loss of sovereignty. How does Israel view the World Economic Forum's agenda with this Great Reset?
Yeah, it's a loaded question, and I think that Israel has a potential role, and it doesn't necessarily go with what's taking place in reality. Okay, so I think that we saw, for example, with COVID crisis, that Israel was basically the first country to shut its airport, to lock down its citizens, to roll out vaccines, to roll out a digital green pass, which required individuals to scan a QR code before being allowed to enter into restaurants, hotels, gyms, all kind of places like that. I went with the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and his large delegation, which included a lot of press, to the climate change conference in Glasgow just over a year ago. And Bennett talked about Israel being the climate innovation nation. So I think that, and then if you also look at the economics, Israel too is racing forward towards the development and rollout of a central bank digital currency. So I think you could look at a lot of Israeli actions and recognize that Israel is very much in with much of the globalist agenda. And yet at the same time, I think Israel is in a unique position to stand against it. And if you actually look at this government, which is a right-wing government, it's a pretty far right-wing government compared to previous governments. This government is not just right-wing, but it's nationalist. And I think that the opposite of today of nationalism is globalism. And so the members of this coalition, Netanyahu's partners to the right especially, they see Israel as being a unique state. They see it as being a state that has strong borders. They see it as a state that it needs to be self-sufficient in terms of agriculture and food. They see it as a state that has its own unique language, its own unique culture. And yet I think that the challenge here is that most of the national camp, they don't fully understand the depths of the globalist agenda. And I think that it will take a significant effort really to educate them as to what the Agenda 2030 and the Great Reset is all about, and simultaneously to make them understand that they themselves are the ones that can sort of prevent the implementation of a lot of this. So on some areas they're there already, especially like I said, the nationalism, the borders, the security, and then in other areas, they're really falling prey, I think, to much of the globalist agenda.
Yeah, it's really intriguing to me because I know that Israel was founded as a socialist nation, but since it's been fighting for its own sovereignty and existence, and it seems to me that it should be very easy for the Israeli people to recognize how the Great Reset agenda would totally target Israel and cripple and crumble Israel in a heartbeat. So I agree that it has to be education, right? That's key to resist.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of issues at play, and even this big battle now over judicial reform that's taking place in Israel, I think, is also part of the battle between nationalism and globalism, with the left wing, controlling the courts, and the court being there to as a super legislative body that can sort of cancel laws and cancel policies of a right-wing and nationalist government, and that is exactly why the left doesn't want to lose the court. They've already lost the government here. They worked for years to get Netanyahu out of power. Netanyahu's back, and now he has, very strong right-wing government, and now the left is about to lose the court. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's so much protest going on over here. But the left doesn't only control the court; they control a lot of the institutions, including most of the mainstream media in Israel. A lot of the media is actually state-operated media. It's controlled by the left. And it's important to recognize that most Israelis are consuming their news in Hebrew, okay? And it means that they are not getting access to a lot of the information about the Great Reset, about the Agenda 2030, about the climate change agenda. They simply don't know about it because it's not being translated into the language in which it exists.
Wow. You are living in the most interesting site in the world at some of the most interesting times in history right now. And really, thank you so much for spending a few minutes on Bold and Blunt, Alex. It's been a great pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much.
Definitely have to have Alex Traiman back to talk more from the perspective of Israel, firsthand perspective. Check out jns.org. That is the Jewish News Syndicate. Keep up with the news there. And just want to mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for faith-based podcasts, at washingtontimes.com, or, of course, wherever fine podcasts are offered. Tune in next time. Thank you for listening, and in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.